Hello, everyone. Welcome to Dr. Deep State. The title of the show today is The Police State Has a New Playbook, Martial Law, One City at a Time. And it connects with a video we did a few weeks ago called The New Gulag. And I would like to go over the article that this pertains to and connect a few dots along the way. The author of this article is the constitutional attorney, John W. Whitehead. He is the founder and president of the Rutherford Institute. He also has a book called Battlefield America, The War on the American People, as well as several other books. So before we get started with the article, it very much pertains to stories we've been doing this week on locals. And one is the transition between Caesarism and I think an anticipation of a Mashiach type of figure. So I wanted to and did develop that on our locals this week, as well as the connecting dot story that we did on Wednesday, August 22nd, August 20th. And that was Yuval Harari, the spokesperson for the World Economic Forum. By the way, that has now been given over entirely to the heads of BlackRock. So it's very concerning, and he's making connections there between AI and the merger of AI and the trauma that is going on in the minds of so many pertaining to events in the Middle East. And we tried to connect a lot of the dots. And this article pertaining to the police state was one of the smaller dots that we connected, but I think it needs to be developed a little bit more. So here I am speaking to that this week. And again, if you want to join our locals community, it's $5 a month. Links are in the description. We do 3 shows a week. We have Metaverse Monday, where we go into the book In Pursuit of the Metaverse, and we also pull together parts of Seeing Through the Singularity. Both books are, of course, in the description section. This Friday on Memory Hole and Wednesday, each and every Wednesday, we do a connecting the dots, taking all world events and coming and finding the essential thread that pulls them together. And each Friday we do a Memory Hold Friday, taking books that I think so much speak to our time. A heavy emphasis on Catholic authors, scholars, bishops, cardinals, fathers, writing especially between 1850 and 1890, material that has been memory hold. And I think it has been memory hold for the elevation of material like this, which is a book we're doing this Friday, From Enemy to Brother, the revolution in Catholic teaching on the Jews. And you wouldn't think a book like that connects to this story about martial law, but indeed it does. It was necessary to blur the deicide, the enmity, and the collective guilt in order to create this new narrative and bamboozle the world population. And I often make reference to the Great Deception. And I think it's important, really, in just a hardcore sociological, political sense, to understand the significance of the police state. There are many dots that we're connecting. Obviously, Palantir, it's really important if you need to, check out Whitney Webb or any number of people calling this out. This is a worldwide digital surveillance / police system that's being implemented. And so when we see the development, the extra constitutional or unconstitutional developments rolling out in the United States, it's important to connect the dots and really start to ask yourself, I need to maybe get involved in some pushback. But it's important first to understand the significance of this martial law move that's being rolled out this week. We are going to continue over on locals to really get the force behind all the revolutions over the last 500 years, which is, of course, the owners and controllers of international finance. And this is just a fabulous book dealing all the way from the Roman Empire, dealing with the French Revolution. But next week, we're going to focus especially on the usury and enslavement that went on during the Roman Empire underground and surfaced. In particular, we're going to focus on the years toward the development of the English Empire. It's fascinating material, and it all connects to this prison system being built around us. So with that in mind, I am going to begin the article by constitutional attorney John W. Whitehead, and the title is The police state has a new playbook, martial law, one city at a time. And there's a quote that it opens up with from H.L. Mencken. The whole aim of practical politics is to keep the populace alarmed and hence clamorous to be led to safety by an endless series of hobgoblins, most of them imaginary. And I think some of these topics for some people sound sort of conspiratorial, but I'm delivering this from this author. So you get a sense that this is straight on somebody that has a sense of constitutional law and history and showing you the development of things. And we do that from many avenues on Memory Hold Friday and Connect the Dots Wednesday, putting this all together and fundamentally asking the question, as a citizen of your own individual nation state, in terms of Christianity, what do we essentially need to know and what do we essentially need to do with this information? So my emphasis here is he's coming really from strictly a secular constitutional perspective. But when we start really connecting the dots and the metaphysical, the implications become extremely significant. So let's not mince words, says our author. Every American should be alarmed by President Trump's Liberation Day tactics. Liberation Day. I'm going to try not to do too much commentary, but we really hook this on to the essential Kabbalah put in the Declaration of Independence. The document, instead of calling it natural law, calls it laws of nature. Instead of calling it, the biblical God, it calls it the God of nature or nature's God. These are essentially Kabbalistic terms, ideas of providence and so forth that come straight out of the Zohar. And so when we think of that essential inversion going on with the foundational documents, we start to understand the manifestation of this. And the outcome is not to simply shrug our shoulders, but a meaningful pushback to these non-constitutional and entirely tyrannical movements is, I think, needed. And that's why we're delivering this information. What is unfolding in the nation's capital is a hostile takeover of our constitutional government. This is no longer about partisan politics, wag the dog distractions from the Epstein debacle, or even genuine national security interest. This is martial law disguised as law and order, the oldest trick in the authoritarian playbook. We have been traveling this slippery slope toward a police state for some time, but under Trump 2.0, the descent toward outright tyranny is accelerating. Building on the expanding emergency powers, he has claimed to wage war on immigration, wokeness, and the economy. Trump is taking aim at yet another so-called crisis, this time by waging war on crime in the nation's capital, despite the fact that crime is at a 30-year low. Under the guise of restoring order and cleaning up the streets, Trump has called the National Guard, dispatched the FBI, and federalized the local police in order to take control of Washington, D.C. This is now an emergency state. This is how an emergency state operates. And I'll just take a breath here and say this. I have taught constitutional law off and on for 20 years. And just from my own personal perspective, I just want to highlight how unprecedented this is, and the indifference is off the charts. And I think the tactic here was to find conservative or traditional minded people that would look the other way when we talk about people that have mental illness, are displaced, or that are a public nuisance in our cities. And so with people getting hard-hearted about the least among us, that was the Trojan horse that I think the deep state is using to roll this out. A real but manageable problem, crime, homelessness, public disorder, is inflated into an existential threat. Fear is manufactured, then exploited to seize more power. In many cases, the facts fueling these crackdowns come directly from the president's own disinformation machine, manufacturing the perception of danger to justify the expansion of control. Whether the trigger is terrorism, civil unrest, economic instability, or public health, the aim remains the same: expand the reach of federal authority, justify more militarized policing, and condition the public to accept the suspension of rights in the name of national security. Once those powers are taken, they are never willingly relinquished. Each time Trump pushes the envelope a little, relying on military optics meant to intimidate. For instance, on April 28, 2012, Trump signed an executive order authorizing mass roundups of quote unquote violent criminals and quote unquote gang members, empowering federal agencies and military support for domestic law enforcement. And just a little bit of commentary. It's not a popular thing to talk about on the sort of mainstream alternative controlled networks, but yes, this is people that talk about understanding the dialectic, the controlled right-left paradigm, problem, reaction, solution. So one team creates the problem, immigration, homelessness, displacement, and then the authoritarian solution comes in to place. In June, Trump deployed the National Guard to California to quell protests over mass immigration arrest, treating political dissidents as a security threat. A bench trial is currently underway to determine if Trump's actions violated posse comitatus, which prohibits the military from being used as a domestic police force. By midsummer, a mental health detention directive allowing involuntary commitments of the homeless under, quote, public health grounds. By August, Trump was deploying FBI agents and the National Guard into the nation's capital in order to clear homeless encampments, because the president says the city is dirty and dangerous. In each stage, the scope of who could be targeted by the executive orders and emergency powers grows wider. These are not isolated decisions. They are part of a coordinated playbook for bringing local jurisdictions under direct federal control, one crisis at a time. This is mission creep in action. By breaking the police state's hostile takeover of the country and our Constitution into a series of incremental mental moves. The administration sidesteps the broad public backlash that a single sweeping declaration would provoke. So for people that constantly do the what should you do, just be alert. Tell people this is not conspiracy. This is outright a movement toward totalitarian government. And it's happening in the boil the frog fashion, little at a time. And it's really time to be alert, nip this in the bud to the extent that you can, in any way that you can. Speak out in any fashion that you can. Once the federal government claims the authority to override local control, put boots on the ground, and target dangerous class or a designated dangerous class, that authority inevitably broadens to sweep in new targets. What begins by targeting violent criminals quickly expands to hard-working immigrants, then the homeless. Tomorrow, those targeted could be protesters, journalists, or anyone deemed undesirable. These executive orders constitute a war on the American people without formal declaration of war. Once the definition of quote unquote criminal and threat and danger are used interchangeably to advance political needs, there is no limit to who can be targeted next. What begins as a narrow claim of emergency power is quickly normalized and made permanent. We have seen this pattern before. After 9/11, the Patriot Act's surveillance powers, initially aimed at foreign terrorists, expanded to include mass monitoring of American citizens. The Transportation Security Administration began as an airport screening agency and now conducts random searches at train stations and sporting events. Predictive policing was sold as a way to stop violent crime, but is now used to flag political activists and monitor protest. In each case, a temporary targeted security measure grew into a permanent tool of control. The difference today is that the slope has become steeper and the slide faster. What once took years to creep into everyday life now happens in a matter of months. 4 months is all it took for the police state to pivot from rounding up violent criminals to patrolling the streets of the capital and forcibly removing the unhoused. Today, the slope runs from the undocumented immigrant to the homeless sweeps. Today, it could run from restoring order to suppressing lawful dissent in the same span of time. This is the logical outcome of a formula that has been refined over decades. Identify or invent a threat, stoke public fear, expand executive power to quote unquote solve it, normalize the new level of control, then repeat with a broader definition of threat. Each time the public accepts an expansion of authority in the name of security, the next expansion comes faster and faster. The dictatorial hunger for power, as Harvard's lecturer has observed, is insatiable. Every crisis becomes a test of our willingness to let the government sidestep the Constitution, of our tolerance for militarized solutions to social problems, of whether the public will resist or comply. Let me repeat that. Of whether the public will resist or comply, of those in authority can always get away with moving the line further. And let me interject here. The final chapter of In Pursuit of the Metaverse is entitled When Christ Becomes Hate Speech. So when we want to start connecting the dots, We see the attempts from removing students on campus that was used to precipitate these measures, anti-SEM measures, and many of them even included focusing on essential parts of sacred scripture. So these are all tied together. The infrastructure, all the way up from Vice President Vance and his connections to the PayPal mafia, Palantir. We have this, I would argue, illusion that there's a lot of tension between East and West and North and South, BRICS and NATO. At the Palantir level, they're all connected. And one of the aims we argue here is that there's a war, an enmity between the church and the synagogue. And the essential aim, we argue, with the metaverse is to eradicate Christianity as an institution and to eradicate it in the minds, bodies, and souls of the human population. And that is the ultimate endgame. And I like to say I don't speak from my own interpretation, from especially that 100 years of interpretation from notable Catholic scholars, priests, cardinals, and bishops, writing particularly about this enmity between 1850 and 1950. For decades, from Pearl Harbor to the Red Scare, from 9/11 to the pandemic lockdowns, we have failed the test. I do my part. I don't frankly see much response. It would be great if other alternative media people picked up on this, and a few do. But when it comes to the point of calling out this enmity, there's really nobody speaking out. It's essential to understand the program, to understand, at least at a secular level, that all the markings are here. Each time the test was failed, each time the line moves further, a little further, the slope gets a little slicker, and the public grows accustomed to life under occupation. The players change. Obama, Bush, Trump, Biden, now Trump again. But the game remains the same. And for those people that just don't want to get the right left, or their mind can't do that, it's the same. It's the Washington consensus over the last 100 years, moving in one ultimately predictable direction. So people get lost in the game. It's important to kind of snap out of it right now. It's the same across administrations. See the essential tyrannical direction of American politics. But the game remains the permanent crisis management, permanent power grabs, permanent erosion of liberty. This is how constitutional limits die. Not in one dramatic coup, but in a series of incremental emergencies that accustom us to living under permanent federal occupation. And do you think it's any coincidence that somebody on the MAGA team is going to go into the messed up blue spaces and finally clean it up? What a way to manufacture consensus, or at least manufacture or maintain a sense of disinterest in these essentially tyrannical moves. The issue is not whether Trump can seize control of DC under Section 740 of the District of Columbia Home Rule Act. The president may do so for 48 hours without constitutional approval and up to 30 days without notice to Congress. It is worth noting that this provision has never been invoked before, and certainly not for the purpose of cleaning up squalor. The law was envisioned for truly extraordinary crises, natural disasters, large-scale riots, not as a political tool for executive house cleaning. So the question we must ask at the symbolic heart of the Republic is the transformation from a constitutional free zone. Is Why? And why now, when crime is at its lowest level in 3 decades? And where do we go from here? The federal takeover of Washington, D.C. is not the end of that slippery slope. It is merely the latest drop. And nothing in our present political climate suggests it'll be the last. The police state will always need another manufactured crisis. And that's how you say these events, manufactured. The framers of the US Constitution realized these are the techniques of oligarchy that are used to subvert constitutional republics. Manufactured crisis. Terrorist attacks, mass shootings, quote unquote, unforeseen economic collapse, loss of functioning political and legal order, purposeful domestic resistance or insurgency, pervasive public health emergencies, and catastrophic natural and human disasters. The government has been anticipating and preparing for crisis for years now. As David C. Unger writes for the New York Times, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness have given way to permanent crisis management, to policing the planet and fighting preventive wars, of the ideological containment, usually on terrain chosen by and favored to our enemies. Limited government and constitutional accountability have been shouldered aside by the kind of imperial presidency our constitutional system was explicitly designed to prevent. Given the rate at which the government keeps devising new ways to establish itself as the solution to all our worldly problems at taxpayers' expense, each subsequent crisis ushers in an even larger expansion of government power and fewer individual liberties. Once the government acquires authoritarian powers to spy, surveil, militarize police, seize funds, wage endless wars, censor speech, detain without due process, etc., it does not willingly relinquish them. The lessons of the ages is this: once any government is allowed to overreach and expand its powers, it is almost impossible to put the genie back in the bottle. History bears this out. As government expands, liberty contracts. If the president can seize federal power by policing the state capitol, override local control, and treat entire populations as security threats without meaningful resistance from Congress, the courts, or the public, then there is no stop that cannot be trampled from being applied to any city in America in the name of quote unquote security. What is happening in Washington today will be the model of the nation tomorrow. Case in point, at Trump's direction, the Pentagon, the military branch of the government, is looking to establish a, quote, domestic civil disturbance quick reaction force made up of National Guard troops kept on standby at all times, which could be rapidly deployed to American cities facing protest or unrest. And I'll just take a breath here. And this could be linked potentially to a reaction to the trade measures that are now being implemented. Indeed, Trump has already hinted that he plans to target Baltimore, Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, and Oakland. This is straight out of the playbook used that the Pentagon training videos created by the Army for the U.S. Special Operations Command. According to Megacities, Urban Future, the Emergency Complexity, the U.S. military plans to use armed forces to solve future domestic, political, and social problems. What they're really talking about is martial law packaged as a well-meaning and overriding concern for the nation's security. The training video is only 5 minutes long, but it says a lot about the government's mindset, the way it views citizenry, and the so-called problems that the government must be prepared to address in the near future through the use of martial law. Even more troubling, however, is what the military video doesn't say about the Constitution, about the rights of citizenry, and about the dangers of locking down the nation and using the military to address political and social problems. For years, the government has been warning against the dangers of domestic terrorism, erecting surveillance systems to monitor its own citizens, creating classification systems to label any viewpoints that challenge the status quo as extremist, and training law enforcement agencies to equate anybody possessing anti-government views as domestic terrorists. What the government failed to explain was that the domestic terrorists would be of the government's own thinking, and that we, the people, would become enemy number one. As I make clear in my book, Battlefield America, The War on the American People, and in its fictional counterpart, the Eric Blair Diaries, we, the people, are already enemies of the state. If we do not stop this dangerous trajectory now, the question will not be whether martial law comes to your city. It will be when, under what pretext, and whether we will have the courage and the wherewithal to resist. So I want to finish by highlighting the what can we do factor. I would begin by rethinking where you get your information from. I would really suggest that if you're not listening, and I'm not talking about doom porn here, but if people are talking about the state of the affairs in the world and not connecting this digital prison system, and it's given a very straightforward, it's very visible, Palantir. We know what they've done in the Middle East, and the direction of things, it's been externalized. It's going to be done for the greater Israel and beyond, and its counterpart is each and everywhere. It's all connected. So if you're listening to people that would rather not talk about that, would rather not talk about these movements to remove the mentally ill and other encampments, and not see the essential constitutional piece of that, because it's not difficult, and that is that it's sidestepping due process. Likewise with the police state and the new playbook. If they're not seeing, for example, a Catholic influencer is indifferent to these issues because the people are homeless or mentally ill or part of the scourge of the inner city, that is the technique, frankly, the evil one is using upon us. It's more important. It's so important right now for people that think of themselves as conservatives broadly or traditionally minded to focus in on the fact that this is historically and fundamentally unconstitutional. And it's very important to view this information, understand it at a secular level, that there's a movement in place right now in America, throughout the world, that's very dangerous. But what we've noted here, when I talk about biopolitics, the essential game plan is to control body, minds, and spirits, and it's going it moves forward. The Dr. Deep State enterprise has connected what we call in politics, or the fringe element of it, biopolitics. I've connected that with the Kabbalah agenda. It's instituted into our founding documents and thus into our institutions that affect our behavior. It's so important for us to kind of see the left-right nature of this, recognize the trajectory of this, and speak out, because that's a fundamental aspect of Kabbalah. They put it out there, and if there's pushback, they regroup. So we can buy a lot of time on this simply by being aware of it. And part of being aware of it is a lot of people that have platforms. It's really nice to speak about sunshine and roses, but there is a time to identify this. That is the nature of being a responsible citizen, fundamentally. The game is that your fundamental job is to vote in this controlled dialectic. But more fundamental, it's to understand the direction of tyranny. And the most important thing you could do is reframe how you get information. And I'm not encouraging people to get into a perpetual doom cycle, but to identify Palantir. It's very simple. Understand what they are about, where they're located, and what their essential goals are, because it's one and the same as the police state and the removal of people, the detainment of people, while sidestepping the due process of law. So as a responsible citizen, wherever you live in the world, there's a lesson here. Recognize and resist this direction of history. So that's what I have for you today. Again, we were connecting all of these dots this week on our locals. Links are going to be in the description. I invite people over. It's definitely a Catholic-centered group, and we connect stories like this with our faith, and we build one another up so to live faithful lives, and at the same time recognizing these essential features of the deep state and the deep church. Recognize that we're living in a time of crisis, and it's oftentimes a lost leader situation, but there is precedent for how we should behave and how we should act as both citizens of this earth and of the heavenly kingdom. So this has been Dr. Deep State. I hope you all are doing well, and I will return again next week. Peace and blessings.